Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. In the past, we in the black media, particularly folks like TBA and myself, have made election predictions, not only to show you that the smart money is on the black media and that you get a level of accuracy here that is superior to the blatant propaganda of the white media, but also to help you understand why you see what you see on election day. Now this year, you probably noticed that from most of the new voices of black media, we haven't been real heavy on doing the election prediction thing, and that's because we've moved past all that. You now understand that it doesn't matter who's on the ballot if they haven't promised you anything. And it's well understood now that the open, blatant policy of the Democrats is to ignore black people. That memo that the DNC issued about how Democrats are to respond to Black Lives Matters back in 2015, that wasn't some fluke. It was the DNC telling their operatives to make sure the status quo is maintained. Black people were putting huge pressure on the system, and their job was to make sure that nothing changed. And it worked. Keep in mind, that memo was sent out in 2015. Who was the president in 2015? Barack Obama. So as the leader of the Democratic Party, that memo could not have gone out without him knowing about it. At the very least, he already knew in advance that this was the Democratic Party's stance on fighting police violence against black people. Pretend to sympathize with this, make a couple of more or less agreeable sounding noises, but do not let these black troublemakers corner you into promising them anything. It was only the uprisings of 2020 that caused things to happen. When black people began seeking solutions that didn't involve us going through these corrupt do-nothing Democrats. We already know the Republicans hate us, but the problem is we've been sitting back and waiting to see when these Democrats will finally do what we've told them to do. And their own internal communication shows they're against us too. And what happened since 2015? First of all, the Democrats lost the presidency the very next year. But that wasn't enough for them to learn their lesson. We told you that when Doug Jones won that special Senate election a few years back, that he would ignore black people, especially black women who handed him that Senate seat. And then that bloated buffoon didn't even have the decency to wait until after he took office to snub black women. He began ignoring them on his election night victory. This guy only won office by a literal razor's margin, exactly 50%. He seemed to forget that it was a special election in an off-season year. And the winner would only be serving the remaining 2 years of the term. He wasn't looking down the road to 2020 when he would actually fight for that seat. Jones lost to arch-racist football bigot Tommy Tuberville, who beat him by 10 percentage points. But the all-time act of contempt for black voters in 2020 had to be from Jim Crow Joe Biden. He jumped into the presidential race at the last minute, and he knew he needed black voters, so he got a half-black woman to be his running mate. Then he had Simone Mamie Sanders as his campaign representative, and he made sure to put her in front of the cameras every chance he got. And he made promises to the black community on the campaign trail. The night that he beat Trump, he said he had black people's backs. And then afterwards, he immediately reneged on all the empty promises that he had made on the campaign trail. White House Police Accountability Commission he promised? Gone. His Lift Every Voice plan? Gone. Though he did make sure earlier this year to go to the Supreme Court and tell them that the Miranda warning no longer needs to be mandatory, and he did that in response to a lawsuit raised by a black immigrant who hadn't been read his rights. All these white leftists and Negroes hoping to get a consulting job for the Democrats, they say that Trump would ignore black people's legal rights. Well, it seems to me that Biden's been doing a good enough job at that on his own already. Now, as you know, these morning briefings are usually recorded more or less the day before, but I decided to go ahead and wait until around midnight to record this one, so please don't expect some revelations about events in the middle of the night. But I waited longer than usual for this one because now that we have enough people who have heard the message that the black vote's on strike, I just wanted to see how well the Democrats would do without us. Ron DeSantis easily spanked Charlie Crist in Florida, that was no surprise, and Officer Val Demings got stomped by Marco Rubio, one of the least charismatic people in the Senate. Demings tried to run on her law and order credentials because she hoped to do an end run around the black vote and appeal to those casual racists, read white moderates. That strategy flies in the face of reality. When you look at what arch-race hustler Christopher Rufo was doing with his phony hysteria about critical race theory, he was trying to galvanize the Republican vote for the 2022 midterms. He lied and lied huge. His racist propaganda was that Democrats want to teach hatred of whites in schools, and that Mickey Mouse wants to be a pedophile. Democrats seem to have made significant headway 2 years ago in reaching white suburbanites. So Rufo and his pals from the Manhattan Institute concocted this strategy of trying to tell white suburban moms in particular that the Democrats want to do bad things to white children in schools. And then they invented some phony baloney examples that didn't even exist. These are narratives meant to appeal to white suburbanites, particularly white women. Their white privilege and their white position in society will never be threatened as long as they vote for the Republicans. That was the message that Rufo and his pals were trying to spread throughout Florida. Simply put, Democrats can't compete with that, but they don't need to. The problem was the Democrats had turned their backs on black voters in Florida a long time ago. The housing crisis for black Floridians is as bad as California now, but you wouldn't know it by how the Democrats talk. As far as they're concerned, it's not even an issue. Val Demings thought that the biggest issue was abortion. She didn't reach out to black voters, so they didn't reach out to her. But there's no way in the world we can avoid talking about Georgia, so let's go ahead and dive right in. We gotta talk about Stacey Abrams. She lost her race to Brian Kemp, and this time it wasn't even close. She got beaten so badly this time she actually conceded. The white media spent the last 4 years trying to portray Abrams as some sort of get-out-the-vote machine, some sort of electoral dynamo who's galvanizing black voters. Why, she knows how to get those votes out there. She knows how to turn out the vote. Joke Reed herself talked about the huge early voting turnout in Georgia, and Barack Obama has been down there multiple times specifically to stump for Stacey Abrams, who, let's be honest, needs all the help she can get. The polls had Abrams with a lead over Brian Kemp at 8 o'clock last night, but as the night wore on, Kemp took the lead, and the more votes that got counted, the wider his lead became, and it was pretty obvious that Abrams would wind up singing yet again, which she did, but hey, she didn't offer us anything, so she got nothing. Now she can try to get herself a job on MSNBC as a panelist. Maybe they'll give her Simone Sanders' time slot, but this shows that Stacey Abrams is not some political dynamo. She didn't turn out the vote, and it also proves that Barack Obama didn't do her any good because black people don't listen to him. He's politically irrelevant. That's what this race has proven. Barack Obama failed to turn out the vote for Terry McAuliffe in Virginia, and now he's failed again with Stacey Abrams. If you fail to mobilize black voters, especially in a place like Atlanta, you can't blame the Republicans for that, and you can't blame the voters either. You can only blame yourself. And speaking of Atlanta, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry at the situation with Raphael Warnock. By all indications, it looks like he's heading to a runoff with Herschel Walker, the candidate from CTE. If you can't beat Herschel Walker out flat in early voting, then you don't deserve to win. Now, Raphael Warnock's the pastor of Dr. King's church, which is located in Atlanta. So how in the world do you have a neck-and-neck race with a man who can barely talk, and when he does, nothing but complete gibberish comes out of his mouth? Herschel Walker impersonates police. He claims to be anti-abortion, but then pays for a woman or two or three to get abortions. This man has his ex-wife and even his own son campaign against him. Herschel Walker belongs in a bad SNL skit, and yet by the time 90% of the vote was in, he was neck and neck with Raphael Warnock, and they're already talking about a runoff election. Because despite having every possible advantage in the world, Raphael Warnock can't manage to get 50% of the vote against the least electable candidate in my lifetime. And by the way, what's happening in Georgia, this is history repeating itself. Remember, just like Doug Jones, Raphael Warnock only got into the Senate because of a special election. And like Doug Jones, Raphael Warnock's been trying to give lip service to black voters, but that's all he's been offering. This is how bad Warnock's doing against the single least electable candidate I can think of. How much worse would things be for Warnock if the Republicans had actually run a real candidate in Georgia instead of a concussion case with delusions of grandeur? It's hilarious and pathetic all at once. You have a preacher who tries to be as eloquent as he can while saying absolutely nothing, running against a man who's so inarticulate he ought to come with subtitles when he talks. A man whose brain has the consistency of warm Jell-O. There's no excuse for Warnock not being at least 35 points ahead of this guy. His church is in Atlanta. What more support or advantage could Warnock possibly need? Apparently, he needs a lot. If Herschel Walker pulls this off, or rather if Raphael Warnock screws this one up, it will be the biggest political upset of our lifetimes. I think one of my commenters said it best. If Herschel Walker does win the election, he'll probably forget to show up for his own inauguration. Next, we got South Carolina, Jim Clyburn's state. Tim Scott, one of the Republicans' favorite token mascots, was projected to be the winner of his race with only 48% of the vote counted. Think about that. Less than half the votes were in, and the white media was already saying that Tim Scott had won the race. How could this happen? It happened because the smartest dumb Negro in America, Jim Clyburn, that's his state. And as the white media keeps telling us nonstop, Clyburn is the most powerful black politician in the country. He's so powerful that he consistently fails to get Democrats elected to anything in South Carolina. First, his hand-picked flunky Jamie Harrison crashed and burned 2 years ago, and now this Crystal Matthews woman has flopped. Nigga Jim Clyburn, America's favorite sharecropper, has already been preparing the excuses and deflections. He says that Democrats need a real good assessment after tonight. As he put it, I just think that we have to plan for 2024 differently than what took place in 2022. Now, does that mean bringing in new people? Does that mean reassigning roles? I don't know. I just think that people ought to just be honest with their assessments and be sure to show up for my fall fish fry. Okay, I added that last part, but you know he was thinking it. Now, when Clyburn says new people, he's talking about their advisors and their strategists. He's certainly not talking about the Democrat political hierarchy like himself or Nancy Pelosi, the people who are responsible for Democrats losing. Hell, Clyburn, if you want a real good assessment of why the Democrats keep losing, I'll give you one, and it won't cost you a dime. The problem is the Democrats have people like you, Jim Clyburn, geriatric fossils who have spent decades playing the game and doing absolutely nothing in office other than solidifying their own power and position. Self-serving empty suits like you know how to get support from rich white donors and then use that money to insulate yourselves from the electorate. As Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and Jim Clyburn see it, their constituency aren't the people of their respective districts. Their constituency, the people who they think they're in Congress to serve, are the wealthy individuals who they get campaign donations from, and these corporations who their family members and kids, like Jim Clyburn's daughter Mignon, works for. That's who they think their real constituency is. And the voters, especially the black voters, can see this. So Jim Clyburn wants to complain about what the young people are saying? Who does he think he's fooling? What's that old saying? A sorry workman blames his tools? Well, a sorry politician blames his voters. Again, this is something that you never see Republicans doing. When Republicans lose an election, they don't blame their voters. They don't blame their base. They do the opposite. They double down on catering to that base. They draw closer to their voters after a defeat. They don't insult their voters and blame them. But then again, both political parties are merely flip sides of the same racial racket. Republicans advocate for what is in the interest of establishment white power, and the Democrats try to sweet-talk us into sitting on our hands and letting them do whatever they want. As long as we keep waiting on the Democrats to do their job, white power is not threatened. The Democrats' job is not to fight for us, it's to con us into not fighting for ourselves. The Jim Clyburns are in office only for themselves. This government has been rigged by worthless elderly idiots utterly detached from reality, to benefit them and to make it as difficult as possible for anyone to remove them. Jim Clyburn's going to blame the very people who they've spat in the faces of. So expect to hear the woke is the problem thing and we gotta stop it with all this defund the police, even though nobody has said that phrase in quite a while. But of course, Clyburn's not going to blame himself or his fellow political fossils. As they see it, their political office is their birthright, and their job is to control or coerce the electorate into letting them stay, or at the very least, make it as arduous as possible to remove them. Well, what do people do when they see that the political system is a scam, and that it doesn't matter what the people say or how they vote? Those in office are simply going to ignore the constituents and continue making government a whorehouse for wealthy white elites. What happens then? What happens is people begin to drop out of the process. That's what happens. So if you're waiting for the Jim Clyburns and his kind to admit that they're the problem, you're going to die waiting. Clyburn's goal is to hold office without doing a thing that you say. In Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro beat Confederate cosplayer Doug Mastriano handily. He was able to get support from both Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, the two black enclaves in the state. And Josh Shapiro didn't have to promise black people anything in order to get their support. And the same goes for John Fetterman. Fetterman was able to just eke out a victory over TV quack Dr. Oz. Philadelphia is in John Fetterman's Senate district. But just like Josh Shapiro, Fetterman didn't promise black people anything. I think that Shapiro and Fetterman should be congratulated. It's not every day that you get to see so many people do so much in return for nothing. As the left half of white supremacy, Democrats are well versed in giving backhanded compliments. They understand the need to patronize black people. Their praise is completely phony. Their compliments insincere. They don't mean a word of it. And yet you got too many black people who go for it anyway. Black people save democracy is something that they say, but mostly it's black Democratic operatives who say it. These white Democrats, you don't see them saying that. Black people save democracy. They might retweet it, but not too many of them are going to say it. You don't see Joe Biden saying it. How many of the personalities on CNN and MSNBC, the white ones, say that? How many Democrats have made it a point to say that black people saved this country? You can probably count them on one hand, and they probably only said it one time. The people who black folks have put in charge, they don't acknowledge how important our votes have been. So when they say black people saved democracy in America, what they really mean is black people saved the Democrats' jobs. But this year, they're looking at Georgia and wondering what happened. And they're looking at Florida and wondering what happened. In 2016, Democrats saw what happens when black voters are fed up. Trump came to town and black voters felt they had no choice but to mobilize and get him out of office. Trump saw what happened when black voters are scared. This time around, Democrats are seeing what happens when black voters are fed up. Because Joy Reid had a big smile on her face a mile wide talking about early voting in Georgia. I guess it never occurred to her that a lot of those early voters could have been Republicans. That possibility simply never occurred to her. And why not? She just assumed that, well, all those early voters surely must be black people. They must be black people coming to vote for the Democrats because, well, isn't that what always happens? She doesn't listen to the grassroots. She has contempt for the grassroots. About the only person, at least at MSNBC, who was willing to even acknowledge what the grassroots were saying was Tiffany Cross, and she only did that so she could attack and demonize us and talk to us like we were a bunch of stupid children who she was going to put in our place. Condescension and lectures don't win elections, and they won't help you keep your job either. So by the time you hear this, the GOP will most likely have taken the House back. But regardless of how this shakes out, we should take the credit for it. Democrats will triple down on insulting and excoriating us and trying to reach out to those Biden Republicans because after decades of black people tolerating being ignored, you're not going to change the Democrats' tune so easily. The Democrats pulled out all the stops this time, but it was the same old stale, pathetic tropes. Trot out Obama because hopefully some old boomers will feel nostalgia about the first black president. Run ads like no voting, no vucking. But as it turned out, the ad about no voting, no vucking had no chance. These are insults, and they drove black voters away from the polls, not to them. But Tiffany Cross never pointed this out, or Roly Poly, or Joy Reid. Only the black media did. A lot of folks are real surprised at what's going on, but we're not. Democratic politicians are not going to give up on ignoring us, but I think we might have reached a tipping point where non-black voters, at least at the local and state levels, are now starting to begin to think differently about these attempts to ignore us, especially if they see that it's becoming a trend. But the key is going to be the grassroots becoming proactive. We can't sit back and wait to see what falls into our laps or what we're able to make others do. This is going to come down to what we do. They love to say that elections have consequences. Well, now we're going to teach them to say that ignoring the black vote has consequences too. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Antonio Daniels, Sharon Tashabala, Michael, Jacques Harjet, and Jerlene Harris. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.